And is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. That takes us to the first item on the agenda this evening, the public hearing, special exception 23-06-02 for the Shoot Tourist Home. Mr. Curry, would you mind do that up for us, please?
Yes. All right. Teresa Shoup, who's here with us today, has filed a special exception application for a tourist home on tax map parcel 3913A, that's at 416 Russo Mill Road. The parcel is zoned agricultural. The request, of course, comes with the requirements of 17066K, and this is not her principal residence, and she does intend to, she lives in nearby Culpeper and is intending to move to this property full-time into the future. The health department commented that the dwelling is approved for 1-bedroom sewage disposal system, and they recommend the tank be pumped every 3 to 5 years, as they typically do. They didn't have any critical concerns of water, other than that, as they always recommend, that annual bacteriological samples be taken. VDOT didn't have any objections to the request, given that it has a private entrance off Route 621 that serves the residents, and said stopping site distance meets VDOT requirements. Staff recommendations align with the recommendations from Virginia Department of Health to limit to essentially a single bedroom, 2 adult guests, and children, accompanying children if there are any. VDH also always recommends against or requests that you stipulate that no food service be allowed. If that were to happen with a tourist home that turns into a bed and breakfast in the horizon, it changes the code requirements. As typical, staff recommends that the permit will terminate on sale of the property. The public hearing was advertised pursuant to Code of Virginia Section 15.2.2204, and this is your public hearing, so I think everything is proper for you to hear from the public and make a recommendation to the board of supervisors.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Since the applicant is present, did you have anything to add this time?
No, I don't plan on anything big, and I'm not a good cook, so it won't be a bed and breakfast. And it's 1 bedroom, 1 living room. My plan, I don't want a lot of people there, like a couple, maybe 1 or 2 kids, but nothing bigger parties or anything like that. It's just, it's in a secluded location. I would like it to be occupied some so nobody breaks in. I can't always get there because I'm working and taking care of my elderly father, so I would like to rent it out so that it's being used and maintained.
That sounds good. And so with that, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing on the Shoot Tourist Home application. If anyone would like to speak to this application, now is your opportunity to do so. Please raise your hand and come to the mic, state your name and the district in which you reside, and address your comments to the commission. There seems to be no one here to speak on this application. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it over to board discussion. Mr. Wright, I think this is in your district.
It's close.
And of course, you can speak to the application or.
I don't have any questions about the application. It seems secluded, seems to meet the requirements, seems pretty small and non-disruptive, so unless I overlooked something, I'd love to hear from my colleagues, but I don't have any issues with the application.
Sounds good. Does anyone have any comments on the application?
You know, my only comment is that it really is secluded, and it didn't seem like the neighbors would be in any way disturbed. And
It's cows. Yeah. I hear it's cows. I've never seen a person on. It's literally, I looked it up, 200 acres on one end and 100 acres on the other, and a mountain in behind. So there's one neighbor across the street down the road, but I don't think anyone can even see it, that's my concern. A lot of people don't even know it's there.
You're right, that's what I was thinking, was, what, I just can't see where there'd be any problem.
The only, and I think I read this, and I just can't seem to find it right now. You're not hiring someone to take care of the facility?
Yeah, I'm
You're-
gonna talk to, I've
Oh, you are?
already talked
Okay.
to All-Star Lodging on Shenandoah. It's a smaller place, they do cabins all around Shenandoah
Okay.
Valley, and they're willing to, they wouldn't do anything until I had my permission.
Yeah.
But as soon as I have permission, I'll call them, they'll come out and manage it for me, because it's not something I ever thought I would do. It was just some place I fell in love with, and I love it out here. And my goal was someday to live out there.
I got a couple questions. I didn't have time to go back up and look up the history of the property. How long have you owned it?
A year.
Here? Who was the prior owner of that property?
It wasn't a company, it was a couple from Maryland that used it as a, like hunting lodge, and they only came on weekends. I don't know too much, they were very kind of standoffish.
Yeah. Looking at the photographs, it looks like some work had been done to the place. Did you do that, or was it that way?
No, it was sort of half renovated. What the story I got is, they started in 2016, they put a brand new roof, and they put a brand new bathtub, and they bought tile, and they started to tile. But then I think the man got sick, and it was kind of abandoned. When I got in there, it had to be like bush hogged like 3 times just to get in the driveway. And when I bought it, that had all just been done. But I did cosmetic stuff, the outside, painted the outside, finished the bathroom, put the floor in, painted the walls. It was really not cared for inside. It was empty, but the,
It looked like the one picture of the kitchen, maybe some of the kitchen was not quite finished when you took that photograph.
no, the kitchen was,
It looked like some bottom cabinets or something was missing. It was like,
I might have them open.
okay, it was,
I stained them myself. doing that. So and brand new appliances, I put a new stove, there's no appliances in there, so I put a stove, a microwave, and a refrigerator.
see that, see that?
Sorry, that went upside down.
Oh, that was upside down?
That was not cold water.
Well, I was looking at that.
Your kitchen is upside down.
Yeah. I looked at that and I thought, wow, somebody put in really high cabinets. It must have been a tall person. I thought it was a tall person.
Now, there's shelves up there.
So I was just curious. I didn't have a 3-foot tall on the wall photograph.
There we go.
Yeah,
No, all the other ones are upside down.
there you go, yeah.
So I just cleaned everything out, it was always dusty, like I said, there was a lot of bugs and things, and some snakes, but and I did put central air and heat in it, because there was heat baseboards, but they were torn off the walls.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a wood stove, which I took out because I didn't want any fires.
So this house had been kind of abandoned for some years.
Yeah.
So it was not in the rental stock of Rappahannock County, it was not.
It's never been rented, it's
It really wasn't even owner-occupied.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all the questions I have.
apparently come on weekends, I think we rented it.
Is Manwaring your neighbors around you? Your neighbors, Manwaring, have you heard that name? Is that your neighbors here?
I really don't see anybody.
Yeah, okay.
Like I said, I walked around and it's on the top of a mountain, so like the bottom just drops off. You can't really hike. I hiked all around the perimeter and stuff, but all I've seen is house.
That's all the questions I have.
Of course.
Since I know everybody knows we have a desperate need for rental housing in the county for local people that may work in the county and do not have, a house available at this time. Have you ever considered renting to
My
someone?
thing is I would like to use it sometimes.
Okay.
And if I rented, then especially in the fall and everything, that was my thought. But I've never done this before. I may end up just renting it, but I just thought of doing it this way so I could still use it myself.
That's simply, perfectly okay. I just, knowing the need that we have for rental housing in the county, I have to ask that question.
Sure. And like I said, it's put it on the table. I tried this and it wasn't. I've never been in business like that before, so it's an experiment.
Well, I drove back there and, I mean, the driveway's in a little bit rough shape, which, I mean, that's up to you what you do with it or not. Some people like a
Well, I have
very
been
private primitive
clearing,
driveway.
And I have somebody mowing, but it
Okay.
hasn't been mowed this week or for 2 weeks, I think, before the July, but to be honest, I'm an honest person. I've been struggling about what to do with it, whether to just sell it and not have the responsibility. I really love it out there, and if this goes through, I'm gonna try to keep it. If it doesn't go through, then I'm like thinking I probably need to sell it and let someone else get it. But I've done a lot of work and I want to do more, but I didn't know how much money to put into it if I wasn't going to be able to rent it, because I really want to put a deck and maybe a hot tub out on the back and do a few more things, but I literally haven't been out there as much as I need to be because my dad's been sick and so much. It hasn't gone exactly the way I planned, but I will make sure it's maintained and mowed and all that, especially if it's going to be rented or whatever. I can usually get them there.
One last question.
Absolutely.
So since you got this management company, I guess, you said Blue Ray, was it Blue Ray?
Yeah, they're out of the road.
So since you got this management company, you got an understanding with them whether they pay the lodging tax to the county or you pay it, you got that arranged? You know how-
Apparently they take care of.
They pay the lodging tax,
Yeah,
okay.
and I
Because there
don't
is a
know-
lodging tax that's due.
I know, I have the.
Okay, good, okay.
And if it ends up with one of the big intermediaries, they'll end up paying.
Okay.
Yeah, and it could go, like, they can deal with Airbnb and
just-
some of those, but I'll make sure I
Yeah,
put it on this
okay.
person.
Okay. We want the money, of course.
And I want to give it to you. I will.
Well, that sounds good. I mean, I didn't have any other reservations about the property, and it's nice to see the property being rehabilitated and getting some TLC.
I agree. I'd like to move that we recommend, move this application forward to the Board of Supervisors with a recommendation of approval subject to the conditions in the administrator's report.
I say,
Thank you. Mr. Light, Ms. Ritter, any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
good luck.
That's it. You have a recommendation for approval, and you are free to go, or you're welcome to stay if you'd like to.
Have you read the new sign ordinance?
It's the best show in the town of Washington on a Wednesday night. That
I
takes us
want
to,
to go out there first, just for curiosity.
that takes us to the next item, the special exception 23-0604, the Beaver Cone tourist home application. Mr. Curry, can you tell us about that one?
Yes, so in this case, Mary Rivers Home, representing Mary Rivers Home Revocable Living Trust, has applied for a special exception for tax map parcel 54-7, that's located at 31 Cable Mills Road. Property is 28.74 acres in size and is zoned agricultural. Similar to the last request, this is to operate a tourist home pursuant to your requirements in the community code. Health Department commented the septic system was repaired in 2021 and is approved for 4 bedrooms and recognized the prior encroachment issue with an adjacent property, which has since been resolved. There are similar comments on drinking water apply. VDOT had no objections, noting that there was a private entrance off Route 602 that serves the property and that the access met stopping distance requirements. Staff, recognizing the 4-bedroom septic, has suggested 4 bedrooms for the special exception, maximum of 8 guests, no food service, and that the permit would terminate upon the sale or transfer of the property. Given that it's a trust, I don't know if the Planning Commission might want to delve into that, if it might change hands within the family. You've handled that a little bit differently in the past to make sure it wasn't punitive. This public hearing is advertised in Code Virginia Section 15.2.2204, and I think everything is in order for you to have your public hearing and consider the recommendation to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Noting that the owners are present this evening, did you all have anything to add?
I do.
Oh,
I
by
do.
all means.
Should I
And
go?
would you mind, I'm so sorry, I didn't
That's
mention
fine,
that
no,
earlier.
it's fine. It's been a 3-year journey for us. So I just figured this is the make it or break it. So just wanted you to know that the Revercombe family has been in this county for over 200 years. We have a long history here, thus the Revercombe corner sign at 601 and 231. My grandfather ran the general store in the early 1900s to the 60s, and my grandmother was the postmistress as well. They built the house in 1908, and my dad and his 4 siblings were born in the house in 1966. None of the other siblings wanted it, and my mom and dad loved it so much up here that they bought it, and it became our weekend house, our vacation house. Everybody else was going to the beach or somewhere else. We were going to Peel Mills, right? So we have been coming up, I've been coming up for 58 years, my brother for 64. My mom and dad were part of the community. They loved it up here, and my dad wanted nothing more than to retire here. And they did in 1990, woo, and became part of the church, FD Church, the garden club, the community. My dad passed away in 1995, and my mother lived on in the house for 24 years, and she passed in 2019. And they both are buried in a cemetery behind the house, which also has many, many generations of Revercombes in that cemetery. So we want to keep the house. We want to be able to go to the house. So we figured out the only alternative would be to do a short-term rental so that we could enjoy the property as well. Thank you.
Thank you. If it's okay at this time, then I'll go ahead and open the public hearing on this tourist home application. If anyone wishes to speak on this application, please do come to the microphone, identify yourself, and make your comments. So if anyone has anything to say about the Revercombe tourist home application, now would be your opportunity to do so. All right, not seeing any hands, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing on the Revercombe tourist home application. Mr. Sisk, I think this is in Piedmont District. Would you like to speak to this application, or?
Sure, I just
Defer.
have basically the same question. As far as maintenance, something comes up, do you have someone that's going to take care of that?
Yes. I have Patricia Obregon, and she's in Sperryville.
Okay. And Mr. Curry said the septic had been upgraded to the 4-bedroom, and it's all in the VDOT approval. I mean, I think it's consistent with many of the others that we've done. Looks like plenty of land. Did you speak to your neighbors, or?
I did.
Okay.
I did. 7 neighbors, some abut the property and others are across the street.
Okay.
6 of those have no problem with it. They've known us forever.
Okay.
The 7th did have an issue, but he is directly across from us and does not live in the area and has not built on the property.
I was going to ask you about that because there's nothing over there right now, correct?
Correct.
Okay. No further questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Tommy. Anyone else wishing to speak on this application?
No, I live in a house that's built in 1905, and so when I saw your house, they did a really great job on this house. And I was wondering how could we cram our family into it, and you guys did a good job with the expansion. And anyway, I think it'd be great if you were able to keep that house in the family. Really, it's such a your family has made so many contributions to the whole area.
Thank you.
I hope we can recognize that in some way.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Atkins, did you have anything? Did you have anything, Tom?
Just add a comment to it. I noticed that I guess the one person that was in disagreement, they mentioned about future bids. But it looks like, to me, you're in a good location. There's really no one right up on top of you. And if the person, this future build, they certainly have enough room, but they don't have to build up on top of you either. So I think it's a good fit, and I would recommend that, you know, we be able to keep the house and the family in the county. So I do know that the Rivercombe family does have a lot of history in the county.
Thank you.
I did drive by too after we received that email and just wanted to make sure that the house and the property was the way that I remembered it, because I remembered it having a lot of mature trees and boxwoods on the property that in essence shield it very well in several different directions. So it is very nicely landscaped. There's large boxwoods and trees that obscure a lot of the property, so it's nice that it's private, and it was hard for me to understand why someone would request additional vegetative buffer when there's already quite a bit of vegetative buffer on the property. So, and it would be a crime to disturb the mature landscaping on the property. So everything looked great, and it is a beautiful home.
Yeah.
I'll just pile on. I think it's a great application, great use. I'm sorry that it doesn't seem to be pleasing all the neighbors, but I think that's probably more an indication of the unknown and maybe just a reaction to the unknown and the uncertainty, I hope. But I wish you the best and would support the application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have anything?
It was a lovely application.
Sounds good. All right, did you want to make the?
Yes, Mayor, I'll make the recommendation, we approve this into the board with the standard stipulations. I'm not sure how that, on a trust, how that would play out. You know, and, I mean, is there someone, the primary?
I'm
and
the
then-
executor.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, and then, I guess however Mr. Curry sees that as far as the trust, I recommend that we send it up for approval.
What was the language we used in the past, Karen?
That the permit would terminate on sale of the property except if it was sold within the
The
family.
family.
I think in this case, you say beneficiary of the trust. You don't know who
Okay,
is in the trust, could be non-family.
that's true.
That sounds reasonable.
That's fine.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Light. All right, any further discussion?
One question. Is that language okay?
I think it's fine.
Okay.
It's all family members
Okay,
anyway.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Sounds good. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
keeping the-
Thank
I appreciate you. And of course, you're welcome to stay, and you're welcome to go, and I'll see you at the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you very much. We had a 2-hour drive, so,
I'll leave.
Oh, my goodness.
She's
Drive
got,
safely.
Washington DC.
Oh, you're in DC.
she's got 2 teenagers that she needs to crack the whip.
Yeah, that's tough.
But if she doesn't, Uncle Randy may.
I really
Did
appreciate
you
this.
stop by my house
Thank
on the
you.
way?
I'm a special ed teacher. I can-
All right, yeah, all morning. Thank you very much, we appreciate this.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Might follow up on the language, just.
Yeah. So this is a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, where really the rubber hits the road is the language that's in the conditions when the board takes their action.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Y'all take care. Have a good week.
All right, that takes us to the next item of business, public hearing on the sign ordinance amendment. Gary, do you have any comments for this before? Do you have any
I'll just
comments for
very,
this?
very briefly, and then you can get on with it, and just say that the sign ordinance has been under review by the planning commission, staff, outside consultants for several months. The Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission met together and agreed to the path forward relative to public hearing. This public hearing happening tonight, and the Board of Supervisors having a public hearing on August 7th at their next regular meeting. Both of those, this meeting and that board meeting, the advertisements are either already ran or will run shortly pursuant to the requirements of Code of Virginia, Section 15.2.204. The changes to the sign ordinance were pretty involved, and they're driven largely by, as commissioners know, and I think everybody here probably knows, Reed versus Town of Gilbert, Supreme Court ruling that was several years ago, and it's taken many localities, including ours, to catch up to that and take the content-based regulation out. For that reason, there's not a typical red line showing what's changed. Everything's changed. The proposed ordinance is to repeal and replace. The narrative provided on board docs provides a link to the current version, and then the proposed version, as well as the public hearing advertisement, is attached. With that, I think that's enough preamble to get the input flowing, and staff has received some, and I think Planning Commission has received some email content, but that's not part of the formal public hearing.
Sounds good.
Mr. Curry, after the public hearing at the board level on the 7th, what's the path thereafter? What could be potentially voted on that day, or will there be additional time delays?
So certainly because the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission laid out the path with this public hearing, with the board's public hearing immediately following, it would make a lot of sense for the Planning Commission to make whatever recommendation you want to make today. And that might be to the board that you think some changes are needed further, or that it's good the way it is. After the Board of Supervisors holds their public hearing, they can adopt it on the spot. They could also decide not to adopt it, or there's limited changes that could be made to the document if they were made less severe, but that is in the eye of the beholder. Some people think less severe is bigger signs, and some people think less severe is smaller signs, and so I think it would be very dangerous to do that. But sometimes it's hard to get public input during the sausage making process.
Yeah.
So you have to get to a public hearing to really drive that public input, and if you have a hue and cry, there's no reason why you couldn't go through another public hearing in the future, even a joint public hearing between the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. They incorporated whatever you hear. That's a long-winded answer to, yes, they can.
Everybody knows now.
All right, any other questions for staff? All right, if there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing on the sign ordinance amendment. If you have anything to say, please state your comments at the microphone. Yes.
So I'm Beth Ponovich, I think I'm in Wakefield District.
Can you help me with your name? I'm sorry.
Oh, PLEN COVICH.
Okay.
Out of Floodhill area, so is that what you're, is that right?
Likely.
Okay, so one thing that has concerned me since I moved here 10+ years ago is the increasing use of the LED signs, like at the school and then the firehouse, and you know, I can just see that growing. And I did a real quick look through the new document and I didn't see that addressed, so I might have missed it, but if it's not being addressed, I would wish that you guys would act on that, because I can just see everybody saying, oh, let's put one up, and then we have like the fire department sign that's out on, it's like 229 down to Culpeper that flashes all sorts of lovely colors. And anyway, so that's my comment to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this amendment?
Of course. Eric Cameron, Piedmont District. So again, I'll reiterate my appreciation for the work of our professional accounting staff who have done a good job on what they were asked to do, which is essentially to take the existing ordinance and keep it as close as possible with what we have now while taking out content, which is not been easy. In so doing, I think they've also added some provisions that I think, in my understanding, were sort of a recognition of reality, you know, what's out there already that, you know, maybe we haven't addressed in our current sign ordinance. However, I think in doing that, we've added, as I've made clear in other forums, including the comments I sent today, which, you know, were quite lengthy, but again, as you say, Gary, you have to wait till the entire package is together to make sure what you're commenting on. Those I think we should look at with some with some care. I'd like to see them removed, actually. I'd like to see the comments addressed. I was in my veterinarian's office in Luray the other day, and they were lamenting how much growth is occurring in Page County. And I said, yeah, we're experiencing the same thing in Rappahannock. And they said, yeah, but in Rappahannock, you have restrictions. So I think it would be very nice if we could keep that reputation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Catherine. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak?
Ron Mackler from Jackson District. I've read it. I've read the ordinance that it's replacing, and I've read the comments from the working group. And I've got a number of questions that I think are lacking. And I think what was just said is that we actually want restrictions that to limit things, but they have to be qualified and legal. And I think we missed a few points that are basically not 1977, they're 2023, and now is the time to deal with those rather than waiting for them to present themselves, and then we go, oh, well, gee, we didn't do that. So first, things that I found in there that aren't, that should be there. There are signage issues in other areas. And they're not in any particular order. Balloons. Balloons are used in lots of metropolitan areas or whatever for advertising purposes, for special sales and whatever. They put these things out and they float around there. We don't need those. And it needs to be in the ordinance. That, and we can do that by saying that, they're not allowed, but it's not there. Video signs. Video signs are not necessarily have to do with lighting. It's now a medium for putting something on the wall. There's nothing in this ordinance that says the word video signs. So you have wall-mounted signs, but there's no reference to video signs. So the way I'm reading it, if I got a business and I want to put a wall-mounted sign, but I want it to be a video sign, nothing says I can't do it. And if you go into Metro Highways in Richmond last weekend at my son's house, you go down the roads there and they're everywhere, just shining in your eyes. And we don't want those here, but if we don't exclude them in our sign ordinance, then they're going to be here. And they're encroaching. You go down Richmond Road, head into Culpeper, and go by the Gordon Baptist Church, and there's that videos, and that sign right there on that church. I mean, it's something that is current, and we need to deal with it, and I don't think it's well dealt with here. Another thing that I think there have been a lot of complaints about over the years, and people generally feel, that they don't want them, are real estate directional signs. Ones that are out on the highway with the arrow pointing down or whatever. We don't need to have those. We can say those aren't appropriate, that real estate signs have to be on the property only, that they're not permitted. It'll take care of it, but it's got to be in the ordinance, and it's not there. Another thing that I saw, which I think is and can become an issue, is in the area of temporary signs. We have no restrictions on the lighting of temporary signs. And I think that's important. I don't think we want to have temporary signs in people's yards or wherever they are, and then they put a solar-operated light out there that shines on it. So you go by at night and you can see that sign. Or you could do, because it's listed in the temporary sign, it's a hay bale sign. You could do a hay bale sign with 25 hay bales. And in front of each one of those hay bales, you could put a solar-operated light that shines up on that, so you can see that sign all day and all night. Do we want that? I don't think so. But there's nothing in the ordinance that says you can't do it. In the lighting part of the ordinance, nothing, no reference to that whatsoever. That's important. Another one is, well, it's not a big deal, but yard sale signs and estate sale signs, advertising for those or whatever, because they pop up frequently, and they can be out there a week in advance for an estate sale down a road or something. We need to have some control on it, because that there again, it's something that can get out of control. We don't really need that, particularly with, in this day and age, with Google Maps and advertising, is that if you're going to an estate sale, say, you see the advertising, you Google the location, you don't need those signs. I mean, that's, they don't need to be there. So let's put something in this ordinance that deals with that. And it's not overly restrictive because everybody's on the same page. The other thing is in the flag and pennant area, and that was mentioned in the Berkeley Review, but also we reference flags, but we have no size limitations on them. And if you go, I mean, you can see some big flags flying around in other areas. We don't want that. Flags, yes. I mean, we cannot prohibit them, but under the time, place, and manner of sign ordinances or whatever, we can limit the size. So let's put that in there. Yes, you can have a flag, but it's limited to whatever we decide is the appropriate size. Okay, and the other thing that's not mentioned in there, and basically it's the basis of why we're here, and it started back in 2018, was a sign in Sperryville, which was considered, or it was questionable. Was it a mural, wasn't it a mural, whatever. I read other areas, sign ordinance or whatever, they make mention of murals and identify them, and they can, you can, on a mural, you can restrict the size of it. Or, that under time, place, and manner, you can do that. We need to do that. I mean, I'm not against murals. I think they're great, but there's, the size of them has to be considered when they're put up. So I think we need to put that in there. Going on to the Berkeley Group review, I read the entire review. I got out the old ordinance, the new ordinance, the review, went back and forth on all those references. There was the 6-page review. The ordinance is 15 pages. There was a 6-page review. There were basically 38 recommended changes in the Berkeley Group review. Of those 38 changes, 27 of them were not considered. That's 71%. We paid $3,100 to have this professional group look at our sign ordinance and make recommendations as professionals, and then basically we're ignoring it. I don't understand that. Now, and I read the whole thing, and all of the information was was very good information, and it had merit. And for us to just, ignore it, that makes no sense to me. And particularly in those 38 changes, 5 of them had legal significance. This is Reed versus Gilbert, and are they gonna pass muster? We ignored 4 of them. The only one we changed was, there was the 10%, it was in the non-conforming signs and the 10% or 10% rental consideration, and then we eliminated that. Other than that, that's all we did on that. Going to the recommendations, the first one of legal significance had to do with flags. And it said that, you know, our ordinance was verging on controlling content on flags. And that should be changed. We didn't do it. On temporary signs, they went to exactly what I spoke to you about before, the hay bales. The hay bales, just the whole thing does not make any sense. I mean, if the first part of the ordinance on temporary signs says that you can do 5 of them in 50 square feet of total signage. And then in the very next part, you go to hay bales, and you can have 25 hay bales, which have 20 square feet on each hay bale, and you can, with 25, that's 500 square feet, and because it's a freestanding sign, you can do the other side, so it's 1,000 square feet. A billboard, billboards are illegal. You can't have billboards, but you can have a hay bale sign with 1,000 square feet of message on it, but that message can't be commercial. So now you're in the Reed and Gilbert, in that you're controlling what's on the sign, and you can't do that.
Are you close to being wrapped up? Because we have been going on for quite some time.
You have what?
Are you close to being wrapped up with your comments?
Not really. I mean, it's
Well,
a
I
long.
would ask that, I mean,
It's a long.
I didn't begin timing you at the beginning, but I think you've been, 8 to 10 minutes into your comments.
It's
and
a 15-page document. This is
I'm
a
asking
public
you to wrap
hearing
up your
on a
comments.
15-page
You
document.
normally ask people to keep their comments to 5 to 7 minutes, and I know you have been to many of our public hearings.
That's right.
And so I'm asking you if you
And
could please wrap up
sort
your
of consider
comments,
this,
that would be
I
much
sort of,
appreciated.
kind of like Gilbert.
I'm
Reed
happy
and
to give
Gilbert.
them my 5 to 7
It doesn't work
minutes.
that way, but thank you, Diane.
Reed and Gilbert is about First Amendment, being able to
Yes, Mr.
express
Mecula, I'm
your public
aware,
feelings.
and I very nicely asked you if you're close to being concluded with your comments, and they closely resemble comments that you have made in previous meetings, which we stayed and engaged.
Apparently you
not-
didn't, because you didn't make any
If I
changes
can
in the
finish what I'm
document.
saying, Mr. Mecula, we did engage your comments. You did not stay for the discussion. You left after you made your comments. And so I'm happy to discuss some of the things that you're bringing up, but we have discussed them as a body previously. You didn't stay for the meeting. So I'm just asking you
Okay, I'd just
if
like
you
to point out also
if you
that-
could make your way through your comments, please, that would be much appreciated.
Okay, I'd just like to point out also that this camera over here,
Yes, sir.
this video camera, maybe I didn't stay for the comments there, but I go home, I watch them, that's why he's here.
Okay, well, I'm asking you to please wrap up your comments
So basically you're
as briefly as you can.
you're limiting my free speech because I'm only on the first page and there are, numerous things in here that, particularly with the Berkeley group. I mean, the question I have for you is, why did you pay the Berkeley group $3,100 and then ignore all of their comments?
Mr.
These are the
Mecula, as the
professionals.
chairman of another body, you know that's not how public comment works. And so
Oh.
I'm asking you to please conclude your comments as briefly as you can.
Well, obviously you're not interested in my public comments, so I will end them at this point and you can do whatever you're going to do.
Thank you, sir. All right, does anyone wish to tee this up, or are there any other people that'd like to speak? Yes, Diane.
Diane Bruce, Berryville. I'm not up to snuff on the ordinances like you all are and like he is, but what I did review makes me feel like that maybe it's even more complicated than it used to be. And enforcement is going to be so difficult. All the various things that he's mentioned, that Ms. Ishii mentioned, and as this ordinance becomes more and more complicated, figuring out what you can do and what you can't do, and it seems to me that we are considering allowing many more signs than we have had in the past, and we already have signs out there that do not comply. I assume this is also a citizen complaint, so nobody goes out and looks for violations. They have to be reported by the public. And so you can look around and see under the old ordinance, many, many signs that shouldn't be there, but I guess nobody reports them. So I'm concerned about enforcement. I'm concerned about it being more complicated, and some of the issues that have been brought up, I think are going to be quite difficult to enforce because you don't know whether you can have it or not have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? If there's no one else that wishes to speak at this time, I'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor to comments from the commission.
I think I'd like to begin, if I may, Madam Chairwoman, on the this lighting issue, because I am pretty sensitive to this, and I think I see the mechanism by which they are restricted or prohibited in many cases, but I've shared the concerns that have been expressed, and I think it's worth walking through that. The video or LED signs are, light emitting diodes, in my mind, would be a lighted sign. And lighted signs, other than those that are lighted through downshaded lighting or other external fixtures, which would not apply to a light emitting sign, would not comport with the lighting requirements, so by my reading, would be prohibited as they are now. Am I?
So there are very few signs that can have internal lighting. All others, by default, must have external lighting, shielded, as you noted. Commercial can have internal lighting, but not animated, right? Like an animated means change more than once an hour. But as was the case before, one can seek a special exception to say that their special situation on their site should allow them to have internal lighting as opposed to external lighting. That's the process that Amosville Volunteer Fire and Rescue went through. And so that certainly could come up again in the future and would be allowed under the new ordinance the same as it was allowed under the old ordinance. Other than that, the lighting really hasn't changed much between the old and new, and it could be an area that the community wants to change.
Well, it's pretty indirectly, following the logic that I just trailed, it's a little indirectly regulated because it's kind of that which is not prohibited.
Right. It's regulated the same as it used to be because there was no content related to the lighting. So we really didn't get in and change that very much if you look at the old and the new, those last couple of sections that require that direct shielded light.
And I know that I've interacted with the zoning administrator on a lighting concern on the sign before, and she was very responsive and checked that it was downward shielded. And having been on the board when Amosville came in front of us for their special exception, I really feel it is the demeanor of the board to reserve those sorts of signs for public service type enterprises, like the schools and the fire departments, where the public good could outweigh that kind of sign.
I think there was an interesting question about lighting of temporary signs and whether that should be allowed. And I don't think the old ordinance really spoke to it, and I don't think the new ordinance really speaks to it. So that is an interesting question.
Well,
Is this a rampant problem that we're
No.
currently having though?
Not at all.
well,
Are there a lot of reports and complaints about lit temporary signs?
No.
And then I did want to also speak to the real estate and yard sale temporary signs. That would be regulating by topic, by subject of the sign, and that is precluded in Reed v. Gilbert.
Yeah, that is one of the difficulties where in the past, the ordinance spoke very specifically to different types of temporary signs and put restrictions on time or placement of those certain types like real estate signs. Now, a real estate sign that is temporary, would fall in the temporary bucket, can't be off-premise. If it is to get an off-premise sign, it has to be either directional, which basically says Bob's produce stand that way only, or come to the board as a special exception request to expand Bob's produce that way to add something else to that sign, which might be watermelon, corn, something that other than just name and where you have to go. Otherwise, an off-premise sign would not be allowed. Most of those little step-in signs, they're all on the right of way anyway, and they're all illegal.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Light.
well, I think you're raising important points as well, but the lighting is such a sensitive one, and I would like to return to it if I may.
Absolutely.
You know, looking at row 537, 538, 534 begins with new signs, which presumably would include temporary signs. I don't think this is a sign, I don't think this section is limited to.
You're right.
So a new sign would have to be lit by a directionally shielded light, or a directionally shielded illumination. So the image of some kind of what you see in awful other places is these upshining lights on signs would certainly not be allowed under that provision. And other kind of imaginable scenarios of illumination would be restricted by the no other type of sign illumination shall be allowed except by special exception in residential and resource preservation districts. So that seems pretty clear and tidy, but the commercial is, I'm a little lost by the reference to 170-119.
It's not there.
That's not here.
And that's outside the sign ordinance, and it's been outside the sign ordinance. That's the same reference that you see there. And I'll go ahead and pull that up so you can
Please.
see.
Yeah, I got it.
So that's the entire section for all of outdoor lighting. And so you look through, this would apply and see. There you go, illuminated signs. So in commercial or industrial, this gets at what you can do for those signs. I don't know if it's big enough.
Well, actually, what I'm realizing now is there's no reference to lighting of signs in agricultural districts.
Because in that's in resource preservation. Ag and conservation is resource preservation.
Oh, ag, and gotcha, that's.
As opposed to all of the residential are lumped into residential. Yes,
So-
so that's in 170-30.
So that's under the more clear and tightly regulated section on residential resource preservation district. Thank you. I'm sorry, were you making another?
So
observation about
this 170-19, bracketed 3, backlighting where light is projected on the surface behind a sign. So that's your typical, you might see a sign at a gas station or something which has a covered plastic shell and there's light inside, right? That's not an LED. But, those LEDs might be allowed through special exception. which would be.
So this
under
is where
17108.
the potential for lighting little fluttery signs could come up.
No, because that would be an animated sign,
Right.
which cannot change any more, the lighting cannot change more than once in an hour. So even if you get permitted a sign that is
Fluttery sign.
internal illumination via LED, you can't change the intensity or anything of those LEDs more than once every hour, or else it becomes an animated sign, which are prohibited.
But the flag, I'm trying to, this is all about the sort of plausible scenario.
Sure.
The fluttering, animated
Yep.
signs that now might also be,
So there's
lights
a-
shining on them. How do those get stopped?
There's a full stop prohibition on animated signs in resource preservation and
But in
residential.
commercial, you could put a light
In
on.
commercial, in certain commercial zones, restricted, not all commercial zones, you can have a subset of animated signs, which are just the fluttery type flags or feather things or something, but not blinky lights. Those
But
are
they
not
could be
included.
fluttery
You
signs
can-
that are lighted.
They could be lighted
That's
from,
the question.
Yeah, I think
That-
arguably any
that's a
sign.
scenario that I imagine from, based on somebody's comment, that I hadn't really thought about.
And as you point out, based on 170.107.1, which didn't change, you can light a temporary sign because it doesn't distinguish between temporary and permanent signs. So arguably you could. Haven't seen
in
it.
a commercial, in like one of our limited commercial zones, which are quite limited. Most of our commercial properties are actually non-conforming properties in agricultural zone areas, or many of them.
True enough. So that's line 477, where it speaks to commercial zone animated signs. If there was a concern about combining those with light, you could arguably include something in that paragraph between 477 and 482 to say lighting is prohibited.
yeah, I think we should do that.
482. We could close the paragraph with, and shall not be lighted. I mean, there could be ambient light. I mean, there's lighting under the commercial standard, but
Yeah.
there are.
We could work that, if the planning commission and board were reminded to do that. It might need to be a subsequent amendment or delay the whole thing and work out specific wording that the public could choose.
And you want to prohibit the lighting of,
Or you could prohibit the lighting of temporary signs, period.
I think that.
Do that in a temporary, in 17101.
But these are not temporary. These fluttery ones,
That's,
are they a subset of temporary?
well, I think they're inherently temporary.
But they're up forever. I mean,
Yeah.
I've never seen one of those things come down, have you?
Sure.
Only in the wind.
Yeah.
I mean.
You can do
yeah,
both
right.
things.
I mean, if once
Yeah, I
they're
think
up,
if somebody permitted it as a permanent, as a non-temporary sign, then it would not be a temporary sign. They could have it for as long as they have their business.
I guess,
I think you're talking about, I think what, you know, I think we're onto something that doesn't exist, the lighting of a fluttery flag. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen that. I mean, fluttery things, you know, are used during the day to attract attention on traffic, but at night, I don't see that, never seen that used before.
in which case there'd be no harm in saying they're not allowed.
yeah, that's what I think.
So I'm in favor of no lighting of the animated signs
Yeah,
and no lighting of the temporary signs as a, again, I think to the broader point that have been made, we are taking a much more general approach to this. So the fact that we have to use our imagination to think about the different scenarios is all we have, because we're now defining these things by much less clear means. So I think we have to be at least a little bit paranoid about things that we don't see now, because they're clearly not allowed now, but they could happen. They may not be likely, but then there's no reason to worry about if it's a simple thing to restrict. There's no harm in adding the wordage to
Well, I think
restrict.
there is a harm when you restrict simple things, so you need to start restricting simple things, and you got a right to take it away. I'm thinking if Mr. Atkins has eggs down there, he has chickens, he has a few extra chickens, and they're laying eggs, and he puts a sign out on the road, eggs for sale. And he takes a little solar light and put on top of it, and runs that for a month. So he's not gonna be allowed to do that as a temporary sign? So he's not
Well,
gonna be
the
allowed to do
headlights
that?
will light that up.
Huh?
Your headlights are gonna light that up.
Well,
so,
I mean, you
know,
take that right away, you take that right away.
I think too, right now, it's sort of hard to get our heads around this because, the days are long. Here we are, 8 o'clock at night, and it's still light outside. But there are times of year where it will be dark at 4:30, 5 o'clock. And the only place I can really think of that has commercial activity that flies a lot of flags and lights them up was actually the Griffin, and I don't know if they still fly a lot of flags. But I recall they have a lot of flags flown up front, and they light them externally from the bottom. And that is a very busy place. There's a lot of people that come through and looking for a restaurant. And in industrial and commercial zones, I honestly struggle to see the harm of illuminating animated signs in the form of flags or feather signs. I think that Blue Door next door may have also had feather signs that just said fine dining or something like that out front. And I don't know if they were illuminated, but again, that's a commercial area and there's a lot of competition and people are driving fast and you want people to stop. So you have to get your message through very quickly that you are a restaurant. And I don't really see the harm in people being able to advertise in that way when it's dark outside.
Well, I was not imagining the commercial design. And again, there are a lot of combinational things, but I'm thinking about temporary signs in non-commercial areas.
Static
Temporary signs in non-commercial.
So you're not talking about animated signs
I'm just talking about, there's two things. I started out talking about the animated signs, but I take your point, that those are mostly in commercial, and we've dealt with those with the other lighting stuff. But now I'm talking about the temporary signs in general, which are allowed in a lot more places. Everywhere. But we don't talk about the lighting of temporary signs. And so that's where I'm imagining a not terribly hard to imagine undesirable.
Well, another thing you have to realize too is that the area of commercial properties that we have in Rappahannock County is very limited. You have a limited number of parcels, acreage, and then within that group, you have a limited number of them that are actually being used. And with the ordinance that we have, there's a lot of permits and to allow people to do things out of their homes because our ordinance is very restrictive in what areas that we have to use. So we're basically using a permitting process in the ag and residential areas to relieve the stress to people that have a business that cannot operate in a business area to operate off of their property. And if they for some need a temporary sign for whatever, and then within that group of people that may need a temporary sign, if a group of them was to put a light on it for evening delivery of a UPS truck or ups or a customer to come pick up there, or somebody to come up and pick up a dog, a dog sitter or whatever, on a temporary basis. I don't see what the harm is in that. I think, you know, you're looking at restricting something beyond what is needed.
So you're essentially arguing the temporary nature addresses
Yeah,
the
temporary sign.
temporary lighting and temporary signs.
Except temporary under our ordinance now goes on for days and days and days. So we're talking, 9 months of a lighted
So
temporary sign. I mean,
you show me where there's a problem that exists, and I'll go along with you.
okay, but where's the problem now? I mean, you do have
It's
the
not a problem.
headlights.
It's not a problem. So if it's not a problem, why do you need to regulate it? If it's not a problem, it doesn't exist. Just tell me where there's a sign in the countryside, a temporary sign that maybe it's become permanent and somebody has lit it up.
I would say that there's not a lot of risk in permitting of temporary signs, and so there's no opportunity for a vested right outside of 100 days or 100 days and 100 days, right? So you don't have to worry about the horse getting out of the barn and never being able to put it back in. This sort of thing, it changes the temporary sign ordinance sections. Those are easy to tailor if you see further regulation needed or less regulation or something. You don't have to worry about having that vested situation. Whereas the permanent side of things, somebody sneaks in during a certain period of time when you allowed something and then you said after the fact, we shouldn't have done that. They get that sign, right? And on into the future, but that same thing doesn't go with temporary.
And at the risk of pivoting yet again, I take some comfort in that, in some of the imagined mischief around new uses of hay bale signs, even though I do tend to, or agree with the argument that it's not clear to me why we're giving a special carve out to hay bale signs, but I feel like we've been around that block a few times. But I do think your point is well taken, that there's a lot changing here, and a lot of how you feel about it depends on whether you think it's just going to allow people to do what they're doing, or how much you think people are going to take advantage of newfound flexibility that we can't really imagine. But in those scenarios, in most cases, if that were to become a problem, we would have a recourse to modify this new language.
But on
Sorry.
the issue of temporary sign, I do think as the Berkeley report pointed out, that it's really confusing to know whether or not we're talking about a maximum of 5 temporary signs with an aggregate size of 50 square feet, or we're talking about temporary signs up to 4 square feet on various types of property if they're less than 32 square feet in aggregate size. I know that they're under different circumstances, under different sections, permitted and not permitted, but if I wanted to know whether or not I could have a temporary sign, I think I would find it really confusing going through this ordinance.
So line 317 and 318 were added in response to that comment.
Yeah.
To try to link the two together and carry the reader. Sometimes the law is not a layman's area, and so there is there might be an opportunity for guidance to help the lay person digest quickly what they can and can't do.
Right.
But when it comes time to enforcing in the court of law, you might need different language, which is this language, at least in the eyes of Mr. Goff. So it's hard to accomplish both. It's great when you can, and there are some other ways to do it with tables and whatnot, but ultimately it's not the direction this went in this version.
Yeah, but I really think that a table would be it's easy to read, it's user-friendly, it lays out what you can do and can't do without having to go through pages and pages of the ordinance, trying to find out, you know, whether you're permitted or not permitted, temporary or not temporary, 50 square feet or 32 square feet.
When this is all approved, a summation can be done, right, Mr. Curry? And just basically say,
There could be some guidance, and, you know, at some point in time, it could be inserted into the ordinance, I suppose, if you wanted to, if it was the same or different, but those sort of conversations have happened at the board level for zoning ordinances in general to identify ways that we can boil down what you can and can't do in a higher level, easier to understand way that doesn't have to have the legalese, it doesn't have the force of law, but it helps, it's an interpretive guideline. So those sort of things could be put together.
Well, and then I think of the discussion we had the other week with Berkeley Group, where the question was whether to cite the code section or just to reference the code section. And at the end of the day, we can write up everything we like, we can put in tables, and then most people will probably say, Michelle, what do you think? I'm getting ready to do this and I want to make sure I'm on the right side of things. Can you please let me know what I can do? And that way people know that they're in the clear. One of our main directives from the beginning has been to work to distill something that staff can use that serves them on a day-to-day basis. And we were very careful to include in the summers and every step along the way and make sure that what we wrote helped her in her everyday execution of her duties, which is
So one of the
very
biggest
important.
things that was inserted into the ordinance for enforcement was the requirement of the first day of appearance of display on the rear of the sign, whether temporary or otherwise. And so that, you know, if a temporary sign is out there and it doesn't have a date on the back, it's not compliant. If it's out there and it has a date and it's a date that's more than 100 days ago, it's not compliant. That very much helps enforcement. If it is a permanent sign and it has a date on it, it helps understand the vesting, the time in which it was permitted, and the rules under which it was permitted. Some of the other things that might get lost in time. So that was a huge add that was Mr. Goff's idea that I think will very much help in the summers and enforcement.
I think that's a big item.
And then I did just want to touch on the question of why we chose to include and exclude items from the Berkeley Group recommendations, and that was vetted intensively by staff and the county attorney. And at the end of the day, those are recommendations, and you know, what they recommend may or may not fit Rappahannock County. And
What I can say is,
what we saw
Mr.
was
Goff and
appropriate.
I went line by line and made changes based on that. I do have some notes on that, and I'll be happy to share with the planning commission and board. As to some of the things were subjectively not what the planning commission and board had told us you wanted. So those were incorporated or not incorporated.
And then to address the questions about balloons and videos, balloons and those kind of squiggly blow-up signs, those are all considered animated signs, by my understanding, correct?
I've never seen a balloon that sticks in one spot. So.
Right, so those are animated signs. And then what would a video sign be considered?
Well,
Is
it's
that
an animated sign.
also?
Yeah.
That's what I would have
And
thought.
internally lit animated, both likely not allowed in most areas without. There's no way to permit an animated sign. There's a TV type sign that changes rapidly. Those are just prohibited, can't happen anywhere, period. Amosville currently cannot change their message more than once per hour. That's just flat out the law.
And then in terms of the question of the mural, I know that the commission's been very sensitive to that, as well as the board, and my understanding is we cured that with the public art language that we instituted.
So this, the planning commission has had language in the draft both ways. One, to try to regulate public art, and then the current to exclude it and just say it's not a sign. And so the reason it changed the way it is was because you heard from the arts community that said, we really don't want you in our business of determining what's art or not.
And we really don't want to do it
Careful
in
what you
business.
ask for. But it is very complex. So you have the side of a giant barn and you paint it red, is that art? Okay, well, if you paint it 2 colors, 3 colors, when does it become art? And you start applying size to that, and it's easier that it doesn't have commercial speech, and it's the zoning administrator determines to be the public art, then it's not going to be a sign. Now, if somebody is aggrieved, they can, take that into the courts, and a judge can decide if it should be considered a sign or not.
Thank you.
On the balloon aspect, since it's an animated sign, is there any language, because I can't find it, language as to if it's tethered to the ground, what is that maximum distance?
You can't have it unless it's, yes, the only place you can have an animated sign driven by the wind is in the commercial zones, and they can be 15 feet tall.
15 feet, okay.
And on the issue of, I want to thank MK for providing such a close reading of the ordinance as well. On the issue of billboards, why is it that we're restricting it to the Code of Virginia definition? Because we don't want a billboard whether or not it's put up by somebody who's in the business of putting up.
Yeah, I think, as I recall, that changed over time at this body because there was an effort to incorporate what is happening now for some of our small businesses, which are these off-premise signs. And so you wanted to allow some of what is happening now, like the corn that way, for some businesses. If they're located on a secondary road, not on a primary, then they can have 2 signs that say, not only Jim's vegetables, but also the bag of corns and watermelons and whatever. So you wanted to find a way to do that. So you had to craft some language that allowed that, but didn't allow the other things. And so one of the main criteria for having that off-premise sign is that you have to have a permitted sign somewhere else. So in the county. So, you can't have a business in Ray or wherever else. It does open you up a little bit that somebody on a secondary road could seek a sign up to, I believe, 32 square feet somewhere else. But that's a special exception. So they have to show you why a mere directional sign wouldn't be enough. That it's hard to understand that Bo's Produce means produce.
A potential user of that could be a brewery or a winery.
Sure. Maybe if their name didn't tell the story of who they were, and they need further explanation, or a vegetable stand that has seasonal items that might draw their customer. It's peaches this week, and it's apples that week, and corn some other time.
I'm not seeing that requirement that an off-site, off-premise directional sign has to be for a business that has a permit.
Directional, no, for the
Off-premise directional sign, permit, a maximum of 2 directional signs not temporary shall be allowed for non-residential use.
And that's the directional sign, and that is a Reed carve out too for directional signs, but that's just the name of the business and the arrow, as opposed to that next step of having the broader.
So there's another off-site.
Yeah, it's like the next paragraph.
Okay.
3, in addition to directional signs for every lot or parcel located in Rappahannock County that has received a permit for a sign, up to 2 off-premise signs may be granted only by special exception by the board, subject to the following. You can have 32 square feet, can be 12 feet tall, a certain distance from the property line, be got line of sight, and the business can't be located on a primary highway, and the owner of the property has to say it's okay. And then what was added in, and this was as a result of Berkeley Group comments, was F. And I don't know if it holds water or not, but mere directional signs are inadequate to inform public goods or services provided at the destination site. So is it just a wide open door that anybody gets a special exception? Or can the language at least try to constrain that a little bit so the board has something to hang their hat on when they're considering somebody's request for more than just the name of the business and the arrow?
So when you say the board, is that gonna be like, go to the planning commission, then go to? the-
Yeah, so it's a special exception, just like a tourist
Yeah,
license.
so it's public input,
Yep.
fee being paid, the whole thing.
Yep.
So would it be like a $700 fee, or we don't know that?
No, it's the same as special, I think it's $600 or $700 right
So
now.
they want to put a sign, they're gonna spend $600-700 and go through 2 meetings for a sign. I think that's gonna,
But by default, they can have because they're buried down a secondary road, they can have the sign that says, my business is that way.
so we can still say no.
So while we're on this topic, this question of temporary real estate signs has come up several times, and I guess the first thing we always say about them is they're illegal anyway, because they're usually in the right of way. But, okay, if we can get that out of our system. Other than that, how do they fit into this? That's not really a business, they don't seem to fit neatly into the categories.
Right, so there's a special type of temporary sign that is allowed without getting a permit. That's so 170-95. Line 260. So it says, if you have a parcel that's for sale, you get to have a bigger temporary sign without a permit. We didn't want every property that comes for sale where a realtor wants to put their sign, plan it, to have to come in and get a permit, because that'd just get overwhelmed. But if the property's for sale, you can have a bigger sign while it's for sale. We can't tell you what you can put on the sign. You could put Bo's Produce Stand, I guess.
And if someone doesn't like the sign, they'll have to buy the property.
Right.
Yeah,
But because we can't say real estate signs are only allowed during certain times, we can just say on properties that are for sale, you get special rules.
But that's not the scenario.
No, and so there aren't, it doesn't provide an opportunity here. That's not permit, you don't need a permit for this.
So that's on the site, so we're talking about the ones that, at the corner of 211 and 729, there's a sign that's stuck in.
Yeah, and so.
That go that way to, somebody's real estate.
Right, so they certainly couldn't have the descriptive one because they don't have a permit for this one. Right? Because those are permit exempt signs.
Okay.
But arguably, they might be able to have a just directional one at the parcel.
I mean, the common ones are the, real estate, name realtor this way, go look for the one that's on the property. But usually those, I think most of the time, those are already illegal because they're in the right of way.
Way in the right of way.
But I don't think we're doing anything here that would make that any more illegal than the right of way. So those are still going to be allowed, it seems to me.
I think so. I have to.
It's not clear
Have to
what
think
would
through
catch
that.
them, from my parsing.
Wouldn't they be illegal since the main sign on the property is not permitted?
I mean, you're right, that section's the only part that seems to me that to address off-site signs. I didn't see any other allowance of off-site signs, but doesn't make it clear to me that they're prohibited. I mean,
Right, you can only have what we say you can have, for one, just like everything in zoning, right? If you can't have it, if it doesn't say you can have it, you can't have it.
right.
But I'd have to look at the scenario of, could you get an off-site, off-premise directional sign directing you to a temporary sign?
Or an
What is
off-site
that?
temporary sign directing you
Yeah.
to a temporary sign. Do your temporary sign, are you only allowed temporary signs on your property? That whole question of sticking on temporary signs on other properties doesn't seem to be explicitly addressed.
And that's not bubbling to the top of my head, so I'd have to
Yeah.
read it.
Well, presumably, if you're gonna stick a temporary sign on somebody else's property, that person would want the temporary sign, or they should prohibit it, so. I think it may come down to just the no man's zone of the right-of-ways where no one feels like they have enough.
I think you've
jurisdiction to
answered
pull it out.
that question to some extent, that if you want to allow temporary signs in whatever size and number, you can't tell the people what goes on it. And so if they want to put on their temporary sign that there's a property for sale at your house that's 3 miles away, I don't think we can tell them they can't do that. But it takes up the person's sidewalk.
The temporary sign.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Then the issue of the flags, it does seem like we should maybe put, I mean, I don't know what the average size of the flag is, but maybe we should incorporate that into flags, emblems, and insignia of the United States, so we don't have enormous flags flying high up in the sky.
This might be a concern. Flag poles are exempted from the height limitations in the zoning. So between those two things, it could be something you want to look at.
And they're exempt just because we didn't.
Because the existing ordinance says that certain things are not subject to the height, and flag poles is one of them.
But that could be fixed.
That could be
in the
fixed.
zoning ordinance amendment. or
That could be fixed as
It says
you
in the
move-
sign ordinance.
Yes, yes. And so you could put a maximum height on the flagpole of 35 feet, same as your commercial building, and if somebody wants to try to put a 25-foot flag on a 35-foot pole, then maybe,
Probably not a good marketing
yeah.
ploy.
Except on a really good.
Sorry. But that is something that came to mind as I was looking at some of the comments that came in.
Yeah. Well, was there any harm in restricting the size of the flag to a standard American flag size?
And that is, I mean, what is that? What is
I
the
don't know, we
standard?
fly them all over the place, though, right?
Well, I think they're standard proportions, I don't think
they're
they're standard size.
3 by 5 typically, for the house. For the house.
Oh, for a house.
For a house. Now, you get some of the others, you're talking, 20, 16 by 20. But I mean, do we keep it the same as a 32 square feet? Like the other signs, I mean, 8 by 4. I mean, the more you go down that road,
Right. So a flag is a sign unless it meets the subset category of the
Yeah.
nation
Flag
state or
and
geopolitical entity.
Where, what line were you just reading?
So the definition of sign on 166 says that a flag is a sign, right?
Mhm.
But in C, that's carved back out
Right.
for a certain subset.
I think you're well advised to leave the US flag out this
Yeah.
Well, the only time I can think of large flags being flown in the county, maybe at the 4th of July. And when a member of a fire rescue squad passes and they do the funeral procession, normally some of the tankers will put up a large flag. And it is really a beautiful memorial. And I wouldn't want to prohibit flying a flag of a certain size on those occasions, because it is a beautiful memorial and a very fitting send-off for fire and rescue volunteers. So I would be hesitant to try to restrict the size of the flags and cure it instead of the zoning ordinance with the flag poles.
Right, and so you can have any number of US flags you want. They're not, it's not, it's just not, it's carved out.
Just leave it alone. The smart person will use it.
And it's also, that's something you could change in the future, and not a lot of flags last forever. So.
I guess to one of the other points made that I wanted to just mention in terms of the complexity and the enforcement. In some ways, it seems to me we've made interpreting, if you want to do something, what you can do has gotten more complicated. But I think we did that somewhat at the expense of actually simplifying enforcement, because, at the end of the day, it's just it's just this conversation we're having. That's a temporary sign. It's not the way people would actually think about what they're doing, but it's the way the zoning ordinance is clear in some ways, and by dating things. I think we've made many changes to make enforcement easier.
I think another issue here is that it's just like a bicycle. We're getting used to riding this bicycle. So every time we use it, we're going to be more familiar with it and be able to remember and quote things as we use it more. I mean, Gary here, he went through this thing with us. And, in life, it does so many things that you see the connections and you see how it's supposed to work. So I think it's more used if you come more familiar.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's imperfect, right? We're humans. But you have opportunity to fine tune things over time.
Has there been any feedback from other counties in Virginia? I know when we first started down this road, and Reed v. Gilbert had influenced a lot of the way counties did business. And there was only really one or two counties that had made changes.
Yeah, I know others have. What I don't think there is much case law for what the changes have been.
Yeah.
Yet. Which is really, at the end of the day, you can copy a lot of people, but unless it's been tested, you don't know if they're the right people to copy or not. And the beauty of all this is, with anything in zoning, if somebody's aggrieved, they can appeal to the BZA. If they're aggrieved by the BZA, they can appeal to the circuit court. If they don't like the circuit court, they go to the Court of Appeals. If they don't like the Court of Appeals, they can go to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court thinks they want to hear it, they'll hear it. If they don't, they don't, and that's it. Unless it's a First Amendment thing, then they can take a federal route.
I think that we have formulated this in a correct process between Mr. Curry and Art Golf, Berkeley Group, the time we put into it. I don't think we've taken any shortcuts in this thing, and I think we've been exploratory and trying to do examples and think of unique situations. I think it's one of the better workable documents that have been produced in this county in the last 50 years. And I hope that we're that successful with the zoning ordinance when we tackle that. You're not going to please everyone, but, I think it's workable and usable and explainable, so it's functional.
You're certainly going to get more feedback at the next public hearing.
Maybe. You
I'm
never know.
a little surprised. I expected more tonight on this. Maybe it's because it's the doldrums of summer or something.
I was very appreciative of Ms. Ishii for reading so carefully the ordinance. I'm sure others have too. And I had one person stop by my office and read the copy that was put out and actually took a copy of it so that they could better understand. And so it's very good when the community is engaged. That's what this is all about. Sometimes planning commissions and boards are forced to try to figure out what the community thinks is important because they don't tell you. So it's great when people do tell.
I would be very curious to see your notes.
Yeah, I just need that.
If you have a chance to share those. And I apologize, I didn't get a chance to read your email today, this issue. I was out of town and didn't have an opportunity to read it before the meeting. But I will definitely review it before the board meeting at the beginning of August. Is there any further discussion or a motion?
Well, I would just continue to object to the hay bales being an exception to the rest of the sign ordinance. I mean, I think that it should just fall under temporary signs. Have one hay bale.
Well, I think our discussion tonight here has concluded that this document is functional, and I think it's ready to be reviewed by the BOS. So I'm inclined to make a motion that we pass the proposed ordinance on to the BOS for their consideration in public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. So we have a motion to send this version of the ordinance onto the Board of Supervisors for consideration. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr.
At
Sis.
least we'll get, like I say, hopefully some more additional impact. I mean, my belief, no matter what you do, there's no way you're gonna address everything. There's no way. And hopefully other people look at this and they'll have more impact to give back to us. So we'll see what happens.
Well, and I would just say in regards to the hay bale signs, language has been drafted that I think with input from this commission along the way, and if the board is of a mind to change or remove that language, they'll do so. But the board agreed for us to have this public hearing and for them to subsequently have their public hearing in August, and did not drive attention to any specific language they had concerns over. So I do think it's probably best to send them what that working document was, and if they're ever mind to make changes, then they sure will. Is there any further discussion?
Well, I would just say, well, I personally would not have made the carve out. I do respect the argument that it seems to have become kind of a cultural norm or something to use when farmers stack hay bales to put things on them, and I feel like to somehow make that illegal in some way would be has an undesirable consequence to our overall performance of this, and for that reason I've kind of swallowed my distaste for that particular section.
Comment in regards to that. How many situations have we had with hay bales that there's been something really out of line?
So during the presidential campaign, we had a couple, and county administration and zoning received many calls about them. Of course, the current ordinance is unenforceable when it comes to temporary signs because of the content regulation, and so that's ultimately where we were, right? There's no way we would be able to have enforcement and court action with the ordinance that we had. And so the decision had to be made by the planning commission and then staff recommending up to the planning commission board. Are you gonna carve them in, or are you gonna carve them out? If you're gonna carve them out and it happens, you have to be willing to take them to court. And that gets really complicated when it's political speech. So yes, you can regulate political temporary signs to the same extent you regulate other non-political temporary signs. But do you want to? Do you really want to take the farmer to court because he's put hay bales up that have a political message? And we can't separate political messages from other non-commercial messages, but we felt comfortable that we could separate commercial from non-commercial.
Yeah, but you can make that same argument by saying, look, you know, I put a big sign up, it's the same size as those big enormous hay bales saying, I'm for so-and-so. And I have a farm, you know, I put my sign on my farm. You want to take me to court for doing that?
We don't.
No, you don't. You don't want to take any of us to court, and we don't want to take any of us to court. But if you're going to take some people to court for having a sign that's temporary, too big, why can't you do it for the hay bale person? It just doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense.
you can, right, and that's political and, decision made when through public hearing processes on what goes into the ordinance and, the opportunity to put letters on hay bales that are already sitting there, I think is a much different scenario than constructing some other thing.
Well, I
Now,
don't
if
know.
somebody
It
put
takes a lot
out a
of
permanent
trouble.
sign on their silo, then you get into, I think, that realm, that's permanent. So those are decisions that were made, and that's why we have public hearings. That's why we have diverse bodies.
Yeah.
So to get that out and let the community really consider the pros and cons.
I think this decision on the hay bale should be left to the board of supervisors. I think it's a political decision, not in terms of.
Not RD, but
Right. It's a
Community.
political decision, community, to let them decide.
Well, I would say it's one of the most unusual and most exceptional part of the ordinance right now. Everything else just seems like an attempt to do what everybody's attempting to do. The hay bale carve out sticks out.
probably not going to see it in Alexandria.
No.
Well,
And maybe that's.
it was a major problem though, when it came up, it made the phone ring here a whole lot.
I get it.
And
That's
so,
why
I mean,
that's why-
we addressed it.
My cousin in New York State posted on his Facebook page that hay bale sign in Massey's Corner. Now, didn't send it to me saying, hey, this is in your county. It just showed up on his page. Made it out there.
Well, and we all sat at the table, I think, for most of us, when we talked about the hay bale carve out, and we looked at Ms. Summers, and we asked her, would this help you do your job if the phone starts ringing again? And she said yes.
It has very clear parameters in a box that it has to fit in. And, the box can be carved smaller, bigger, whatever, but it is,
It's a special box.
It's a
That's
special
the thing. It is a special box.
Is there any further discussion? Well, we have a motion and a second on the table, so if there's no further discussion, I'll go ahead and ask everyone that wants to send this along to the Board of Supervisors to signify by saying aye. Aye. If there's any opposed, please say nay.
Yeah, I oppose, I just think the hay bale thing is too irrational.
And I'll be sure to pass that along to the board. I will convey all comments to the board as their representative this year. And with that, that concludes the sign ordinance amendment agenda item for the evening. Takes us to public comment. Now is your opportunity to speak to the commission on any number of topics. If you could approach the microphone, please, and direct your comments to the commission, that would be wonderful. Anyone wishing to speak? If there's no one wishing to speak during public comment, we don't have any new business this evening. Informational is our list of directions from the board of supervisors, and I will ask my peers if there's anything we should be working on this year besides the zoning and ordinance changes that we're on track for this fall. Any further discussion from the members of the commission? All right, if there's no further discussion, motion to adjourn?
So
Second.